The subway was alive with echoes. Metal wheels screeching on old rails, hurried footsteps slapping against concrete, and announcements blaring above heads bowed low in routine defeat. Among the crowd, a man sat alone on a bench, hidden beneath a long coat and shadowed eyes. His name was Charles Blake, once a titan of business, now just a grieving ghost in a city too loud to mourn in. It had been a year since the accident, a single second that stole his wife and daughter, and left him with a fortune that felt more like a prison than a privilege. He came to the subway not to go anywhere, but to sit with his sorrow, where no one would recognize his name or pity his pain. That's when he heard her. A voice, small, pure, and haunting, cut through the noise like sunlight and fog. A little girl, no older than 9, stood barefoot with a cracked ukulele in her arms, singing to a crowd that didn't bother to listen. But he did. For the first time in a year, Charles looked up, and that single song, sung by a stranger in the depths of the city, would begin to unravel everything he thought he knew about grief, healing, and second chances. This is their story. The subway station smelled of rust, rain, and old secrets. New York's underbelly was alive, its pulse beating through every screech of brakes and shuffle of weary feet. People moved like shadows, lost in thought, in time, or just in survival. Among them, in the corner of the uptown platform at Lexington Avenue, stood a small girl clutching a scratched plastic cup and a ukulele with a crack down the middle. Her name was Emma. She looked no older than 10, her jeans frayed at the knees, her oversized hoodie hanging on her like a curtain. She didn't beg. She sang. The moment she opened her mouth, the noise of the world paused. Her voice, pure and warm, wrapped around hearts like a thread of hope in a hopeless place. She sang old songs, classics her mother used to hum while folding laundry, lullabies from forgotten times, and sometimes little songs she made up on the spot. Today, her song was soft and sad. Something about the rain and missing someone you can never touch again. Across the platform, a man in a charcoal gray coat sat on a bench, hunched forward, staring at the ground. His eyes were tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from something deeper, like he had run too long without knowing why. His name was Charles Blake. No one knew him here. In this underground blur of noise and steel, he wasn't the Charles Blake, tech mogul, Forbes billionaire, media recluse. He was just another man among thousands, anonymous in his grief. 3 months ago, his wife, Isabel, and their daughter, Lily, had been killed in a freak car crash. A drunk driver had swerved off the road and crushed their vehicle on a sunny Saturday morning. Charles had been out of town on business. One missed call from Isabel haunted him now more than anything. The final "I love you" he never picked up. He came to the subway every evening since, not to ride, not to go anywhere, just to sit, to disappear. But today was different. Emma's voice drifted through the tunnel and slid into the cracks in his soul. The rain falls on windows and puddles the street, but I miss your laughter, your tiny bare feet. If wishes were echoes, I'd call you by name, but now you're a picture inside of a frame. Charles looked up. She was just a child, singing her heart out with her eyes half closed as if she were somewhere else, somewhere warmer, safer. Her voice didn't have the polish of stage training, but it had something far rarer. Truth. He watched as people slowed down, some tossing coins into her cup, others simply stopping to listen. Her hoodie sleeve slipped, revealing a skinny arm covered in faint bruises, not the violent kind, but the kind that said life had been unkind. A pang shot through Charles. Lily would have been Emma's age. Emma noticed the man staring at her. Most people kept walking. Some smiled, a few jeered. But he just looked lost. She ended her song and, for the first time, walked up to someone after performing. Her steps were hesitant but bold in a way only street kids could manage. She asked if he was okay. Charles blinked, stunned that she was speaking to him. He told her he heard her song, that it was beautiful. Emma beamed and said she made it up, that her mom says she has an old soul. Charles agreed her mom was probably right. Emma reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a small candy, a lemon drop wrapped in yellow cellophane. She offered it, saying it wasn't much, but he looked like he needed something sweet. Charles stared at it. A billionaire being handed candy by a child on a subway platform. It was absurd. It was perfect. He took it. Emma didn't ask for money, didn't even try to linger. She just smiled and returned to her spot, tuning her broken ukulele. When the train screeched to a stop and doors slid open, the crowd flowed in and out like a tide. But Charles didn't move. He sat there, the lemon drop melting in his mouth, and watched her vanish into the tunnels once her performance was over, gone like a whisper in the wind. That night, for the first time in months, he dreamed of something other than coffins and regret. He dreamed of a little girl singing to the stars. The next day, Emma was back. So was Charles. She didn't see him immediately. He had moved to the shadows where the lights didn't reach. She strummed her ukulele again, this time with more pep. It was a song about dancing in puddles and finding pennies on the sidewalk. People dropped quarters. Someone gave her $1. Charles watched. There was a rhythm to her life, a pattern. Sing for 2 hours. Walk down the tunnel. Climb the stairs. Gone. He followed her at a distance that day. Emma left the station and took a right into a narrow alley. From there, she slipped into an old brick building with faded green doors. A sign read, Tilden Housing, Low-Income Apartments. He stood across the street, hands in pockets, wondering. Was she alone? Did she have someone? Was she safe? Inside the apartment, Emma entered a small room where her mother, Maria, lay on a tattered couch, coughing into a rag. The TV flickered, casting dim light on the walls. Maria asked if she sang today. Emma nodded and placed a handful of coins in a jar on the shelf. She told her mom she met a sad man and gave him a candy. Maria smiled, weak but proud, saying Emma had her daddy's heart. They didn't have much. Heat barely worked. The fridge groaned like it wanted to give up. But they had each other, and songs. Outside, Charles lingered, then walked away. He didn't know what he was doing. He just knew he had to come back. Over the next week, Emma and Charles became silent fixtures in each other's world. She sang. He listened. Sometimes he dropped a bill in her cup, never too much to scare her, just enough. One day it was a $10 bill. The next, a neatly folded 50 with a note. For your songbook. Emma read it at home and giggled. Songbook? She had scraps of paper and memory. Maria touched her daughter's cheek and said, maybe he was her angel. Emma tilted her head and asked if angels wore sad eyes. Maria didn't answer. She just looked toward the window and whispered a prayer into the city air. One evening, Emma sang a lullaby she hadn't sung in months. It was one her father used to hum before he left for work at the docks. He never came back. An accident, they were told. Since then, it had just been Emma and her mom, trying to stay afloat. Her voice cracked a little. She blinked back tears. The song ended on a soft whisper. Charles stood up and walked toward her. She looked up, surprised. She said hi. He crouched down, meeting her eyes. He said he'd like to hear that one again. Emma grinned and told him it costs a smile. He smiled, and she sang. Charles Blake hadn't smiled in over 90 days. Not a genuine one, anyway. His staff at Blake Innovations had learned to recognize the mask, a tight-lipped, polite curve that never quite reached his eyes. Since Isabel and Lily died, his world had become a haunting echo chamber filled with automated condolences and cold sympathy cards. But when the little girl on the subway demanded a smile for her song, and he gave her one, something cracked open inside him. It terrified him. He tried to shake it off. He buried himself in board meetings and reports, flew to a robotics expo in Tokyo, and held a press conference on AI ethics. But every night, he found himself back at the subway platform, watching her. Emma. He didn't even know her last name, but he knew her voice. It haunted him in the gentlest way, It wasn't the notes she sang. It was the ache in them, as if she, too, carried a burden far too heavy for her tiny frame. That Sunday, Charles sat in his penthouse office with the skyline stretched before him like a painting. He sipped coffee and stared at his late daughter's drawing, still taped to his desk, stick figures with triangle dresses and lopsided smiles. Me, Mommy, Daddy, it read in purple crayon. He closed his eyes. Then he picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. "Marcus," he said, "I need a favor." Emma hadn't seen the sad man in 3 days. She tried not to feel disappointed. People came and went in the subway. That was life. But part of her missed the way he listened, truly listened. Most people heard her voice, maybe liked the sound and moved on. But he looked at her like he was hearing more than a song, like he understood. She came home to find her mother paler than usual. Maria's cough had worsened, and the leftover soup Emma brought back had gone untouched. "Mom, I think we should go back to the clinic." Maria shook her head. "No money, baby, I'll be fine." "You said that last week," Emma mumbled, her eyes wet. Maria reached out, fingers trembling, and stroked Emma's cheek. "Don't worry about me, love. Just keep singing." Across the city, Charles sat with Marcus in a high-tech control room deep within one of his company's secure locations. They reviewed subway security footage from the last 10 days. Marcus paused the screen. "That's her," Charles said softly, pointing. "The girl. Can you trace her path?" Marcus did, skillfully following Emma's route from the platform to the streets and eventually to the Tilden housing building. "You want me to reach out?" "No. Not yet." Charles leaned back. "I need to know more. Her name, her situation." Quietly. Over the next few days, he learned everything. Her name, Emma Santos, 10 years old. Her mother, Maria Santos, 33, single parent, worked 2 jobs before falling ill, currently battling a severe lung condition, likely pneumonia or worse. No insurance, no known father for Emma, barely surviving on disability and whatever Emma earned from singing. Charles sat alone with this information and felt his chest tighten. He could see Lily in Emma. Same spark, same stubbornness. Life had been cruel to both girls, but where Lily had grown up in a palace, Emma was struggling to keep her mother alive in a crumbling apartment. That night he returned to the subway platform. She was there, singing a silly song about moon cheese and flying toasters. The crowd chuckled. Emma bowed with flair. But the moment she saw him, she grinned wider than usual. "You're back," she said, hopping off the edge of the platform. "Missed my concert?" "I did," Charles admitted. "I've been traveling." She nodded. "You look tired. Did you forget to smile again?" "I might have." "Then I'll give you a double song." And she did. After her set, they sat side by side on the bench. She offered him another lemon drop. He took it. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Charlie." It wasn't a lie, exactly, just a softened truth. "I'm Emma," she said, "but you already knew that." He chuckled. "I guessed." She leaned forward. "You really like music?" "Yes. My daughter used to sing." Emma's eyes lit up. "Where is she?" Charles looked down. "She's not here anymore." Emma fell silent for a moment, her fingers gripping her ukulele. "My dad's gone too. Boat accident. I was 5. Charles turned to her, surprised by the maturity in her voice. "Mom says some people stay in our hearts even after they leave. Like echoes." He blinked away the sting in his eyes. "She sounds wise." "She is. But she's sick." The words came out like a confession. "She doesn't want to go to the hospital. Says it's too expensive." Emma's voice dropped. "I'm scared." Charles felt something shift in him. Grief had kept him paralyzed, but now he felt purpose. Clear. Urgent. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "Take this," he said. Emma looked inside. 5 crisp $100 bills stared back at her. Her eyes widened. "That's too much. It's for your mom. A gift, no strings. Emma stared at him suspiciously. People don't just give stuff like this. Charles smiled softly. Some do. Emma hugged the envelope to her chest. Thank you, Charlie. And for the first time, she didn't vanish down the tunnel alone. Charles walked her to the corner of her building. He didn't go inside, just watched until she was safe behind the green door. The next morning, Charles called a doctor, a private, discreet one he'd used for his family for years. He gave the address, paid in advance. Treat her like royalty, he said. No questions. That night, Maria was diagnosed with advanced pneumonia. If left untreated, it would have progressed to something irreversible. She was rushed to the hospital, this time with no cost barrier. Charles had covered everything. Emma stood by her mom's side, clutching her hand, whispering songs to keep her calm. When Maria finally fell asleep, Emma walked into the hallway and found Charles sitting there, waiting. You did this, she whispered. I just helped. No, she said firmly. You saved her. He looked at her and felt tears pushing again. Emma suddenly reached out and hugged him. It was the first time anyone had touched Charles with affection in months, and it broke him. Later, Emma sat beside him on a hospital bench. The air smelled of antiseptic and coffee. Charlie, she asked softly. Who was she? Who? Your daughter. Charles swallowed hard. Lily. She loved strawberry ice cream and dancing in her pajamas. She'd be about your age now. Emma smiled sadly. Do you think she would have liked my songs? She would have adored you. They sat in silence for a long time, and in that stillness, a new kind of peace began to bloom. It had been 3 weeks since Charles Blake had intervened in Emma and Maria's life, and things had changed in subtle, powerful ways. Maria had made a remarkable recovery. The doctors were impressed, not just by the effectiveness of the treatment, but by the frequency of Emma's singing at her bedside, which they half-jokingly called miracle music. Emma still visited the subway platform sometimes, but more out of nostalgia. She no longer sang for coins. She sang for joy. Charles made himself a quiet presence in their lives. He didn't announce who he was, didn't flaunt his wealth. He showed up with groceries, helped Maria navigate insurance paperwork, and spent long hours talking with Emma about music, books, and life. The little girl had become a beam of light in his otherwise gray existence. He hadn't returned to his penthouse in weeks. One crisp Friday morning, Charles took Emma to Central Park. It was her first time seeing it. He rented a rowboat, something Lily had loved, and they paddled across the calm lake, while Emma pointed out ducks and turtles like she'd discovered new continents. She suddenly asked why he helped them. He paused and replied that he needed to remember what hope looked like, and she reminded him. Emma smiled and said she thought he needed a friend. He nodded and said she was right. Later that afternoon, Emma and Charles returned to the hospital to visit Maria, who was sitting up and sipping tea. Her cheeks had color again. When she saw Charles walk in with Emma, her eyes softened. She told him he was always there. He nodded and simply said he cared. Maria looked at him gently and said that was dangerous for a man with secrets. He blinked. She tilted her head and told him she might be sick, but she wasn't blind. She had seen his face in the newspaper. Emma hadn't, but she had. He was Charles Blake, the billionaire who lost his family. Charles didn't deny it. Maria asked why he hadn't told Emma. He said it was because she treated him like Charlie, not Charles Blake, not the man with a fortune, just a guy who forgot how to smile. Maria nodded and asked him to promise something. He said anything. She told him not to disappear on Emma. He may have saved her, but he saved Emma more. She had been beginning to believe the world didn't care. Charles felt a lump rise in his throat and promised he wouldn't. As the days passed, Charles became a father figure to Emma. He took her to bookstores, parks, and one magical evening, to a small concert hall where a children's music recital was held. Charles had arranged for Emma to perform. She stood backstage with trembling hands, her ukulele slung across her chest. She whispered that she couldn't do it, Charles knelt beside her and reminded her that she had already sung in the toughest place in the world, a subway platform. This stage was nothing. She looked into his eyes and asked if he would watch her. He promised to be in the front row. Emma walked onto the stage, tiny and bright under the spotlight. The room hushed. She plucked the first note. Then another. Then she sang, "There's a man who forgot how to smile, but he found it again after a while. Through music and a little girl's voice, he made a broken heart rejoice." Charles clutched the arms of his chair. We sang to forget, we sang to feel. Turns out that music helps hearts heal. He gave more than money could ever do. He gave me hope and I gave him too. The room erupted into applause. Emma beamed at him from the stage, and Charles, for the first time since Lily's death, stood and applauded with tears in his eyes. After the show, reporters approached Charles, having recognized him. They asked if the little girl was his protégé. He looked at Emma, who was holding her mother's hand. He said she wasn't his protégé. She was his family. And for the first time, he truly meant it. Winter melted into spring, and the city's harsh edges softened under blooming cherry blossoms and sunlit mornings. Emma, now enrolled in a music program at a prestigious youth academy thanks to an anonymous sponsor, walked the halls with her ukulele strapped proudly to her back. She still called him Charlie. Even as his name began to pop up in articles again, this time about charity foundations, music outreach programs, and urban youth funding, Charles insisted on keeping things grounded with her. He still picked her up for weekend outings, sat on the floor eating pasta with Emma and Maria in their modest new apartment, and attended every school performance she had. Maria, fully recovered, had taken a job as an administrative assistant at a local music school. She smiled more now, sincerely, and often. The hospital bills, once an insurmountable wall, had mysteriously been forgiven. One sunny afternoon, the three of them sat in Central Park with ice cream. Emma asked if they were meant to meet. He looked at her, the sunlight catching the curl of her hair, and said he didn't think they met by chance. He thought they saved each other. Emma beamed and asked if they could keep saving more people. Charles raised a brow and asked what she meant. She grinned and said they should sing in the subway again, but this time for other people. Maybe someone else down there was sad and needed a song. Maria chuckled and nodded, saying from the mouths of babes. That weekend they returned to the same subway station. Charles wore a simple hoodie and jeans. Emma carried her ukulele and a hand-painted cardboard sign that read, "Songs for Hope. Leave a smile, not a coin." Commuters glanced curiously. Then the music started. It wasn't perfect, a little off-key at times, but there was soul, there was healing, there was Emma. A woman in a business suit stopped, tears welling up. A young man filming on his phone wiped his eyes. Children danced. And in a quiet corner, Charles watched them come alive. By the time the session ended, Emma had a dozen thank you notes tucked into her ukulele case. She giggled and said it worked. Charles nodded and said she was making magic again. Word spread. Soon, Emma and Charles, without revealing his identity, were invited to perform at schools, orphanages, and shelters. Emma's story reached a local news station. They covered her subway performances, her mother's recovery, and the mystery man who helped make it all possible. Charles finally agreed to one televised interview. He sat beside Emma, the host beaming. The host said he was Charles Blake, one of the wealthiest men in the world, yet spent his days performing with a little girl in subway tunnels, and asked why. He smiled and said he lost everything that mattered once, and a song brought him back. She brought him back. Emma leaned into his shoulder, and now, he said, they were writing a new song together. Months passed. A foundation called the Lily Grace Project launched, named after Charles's daughter, aimed at supporting musical education for underprivileged children. Emma was its honorary ambassador. Maria oversaw logistics. And Charles, no longer grieving, but still healing, was its beating heart. One day, while visiting a children's hospital as part of their outreach, Emma walked up to a little boy in a wheelchair. She asked if he wanted to hear something cool. He nodded. She sat beside him and began to sing. There's a light in the dark. It begins with a song. It may start out small, but it grows strong. And when you feel like the world forgot, just know you're not. Charles watched from the doorway, tears forming once more, but this time, they were from joy. That night, back in their apartment, Emma looked up from her notebook and asked if he missed her. Lily. He nodded and said every day. Emma took his hand and said then they would sing for her too. He smiled, voice thick, and said she would have loved her. Emma whispered that she loved her, and with the city glowing beyond their window, the sounds of laughter and a soft song drifted through the walls, proof that healing could indeed begin with a single note. Years passed, and the city never stopped moving. New faces filled old subway stations, and the rhythm of life marched on. But one voice remained, a memory woven into the streets, the platforms, and the hearts of those who once paused to listen. Emma Grace Blake, no longer the small girl with a battered ukulele, now stood on grand stages, her voice matured but still full of the wonder that once changed a billionaire's life. Her name was known around the world, not just for her talent, but for her story. A story that began in the shadows of a subway and blossomed into something timeless. The Lily Grace Foundation had grown far beyond its humble beginnings. Schools were built, instruments were donated. Thousands of children, just like Emma once was, now had a reason to dream. And behind every concert, every scholarship, every song played in hospital wards or street corners, was the spirit of one man, Charles Blake. He had become more than a grieving father. He had become a father again. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Emma would return to that same subway platform, not for fame, not for press, but to sing one song, for the little girl she used to be, for the man who sat alone and hurting, for the mother who never stopped believing, and for the family they built together. The crowds never knew the full story. They didn't see the years of pain or the quiet moments of healing. They only heard the music, and sometimes that's all you need, because in a city of millions, one voice, one song, can still change everything. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Bye, see you in our next video.